Welcome to A James Bond Journey, a series where I discuss my thoughts and opinions on the James Bond series after having watched it for the very first time. Today, we are here to talk about the Pierce Brosnan era. Brosnan, like Timothy Dalton, had been approached to play Bond much earlier than he actually got to play Bond. His then-wife, Cassandra Harris, was actually in For Your Eyes Only, and Albert Broccoli took an interest in him. He was the man in mind to take the place of Roger Moore when the time came. Then, the show Brosnan was on, Remington Steele signed him on to return to the show. Brosnan was now required to stay on the show, and Broccoli didn't want a Bond actor closely associated with another popular role at the same time. And so they re-offered the role to Dalton. If you'd like to know the circumstances that made Dalton leave the role of Bond, check out the review I did of Timothy Dalton's stint as Bond. Link in the description. Brosnan was reapproached after the legal disputes and, like Dalton before him, finally got to play Bond after waiting a long time. Brosnan's Bond is one of my favorites. It took me a while to figure out exactly what makes him stand out, and then I realized he is the most balanced Bond. He's suave and charming like Connery, can be goofy like Moore, and can be ruthless like Dalton. And he works all three of these into his films without it seeming weird or out of place. It's hard to be able to do all of those things and blend them together in a way that isn't jarring. There is an overarching feeling of gracefulness you get when watching Brosnan's Bond that is unique to him. He's sleek. He is also, in my opinion, the wittiest Bond we ever got. Brosnan's one-liners as Bond are, when taken all together, my favorites in the series. Brosnan also came at a time when the world was changing, and in a way that specifically affected tried-and-true Bond stories. Namely, the Cold War ended. And so the classic Blofeld-style supervillain turning the US and USSR against each other trope couldn't fly anymore. The series had to think of new fallback plots. Brosnan also came at a time when people weren't sure about the direction Bond was going in. Dalton had left, and there was a 6-year hiatus between his last film and Brosnan's first. Eon were afraid people would forget about Bond if they went much longer without making a film, so his next one had to be big. And boy, did they ever get their money's worth. GoldenEye was one of the biggest moments in the history of James Bond. It is one of the absolute greatest films in the series, and without a doubt, the second most iconic James Bond film next to Goldfinger. GoldenEye is unique for me personally in that I actually knew the plot of this film before I watched it. This is because, like many people, I played the GoldenEye 007 game for the N64. I don't think there's any way to quantify this, but I think there's an argument that you could make that GoldenEye has the most well-known plot of any James Bond movie. I don't really like the game at all now as an adult, but I am pleased to announce that I fucking love the movie it was based on. GoldenEye is a very special film in the James Bond franchise. It was the first Bond film to be released after the hiatus, and the first Bond film of the 90s. It was the first Bond film to not be based off an Ian Fleming story. That well had almost run dry at this point. And it was the first to make a big deal about its new Bond actor. Live and Let Die and The Living Daylights didn't exactly push themselves as the debuts of a new Bond. GoldenEye did. This was the first film to feature Judi Dench as M, a role she would keep even after Brosnan was done playing Bond. And this was the first time M was treated as an actual character. She's not in this one very much, but she's memorable, she's expressive, she has a screen presence that previous M's did not have. Like in her lines about CNN and calling Bond out on how he was beginning to be perceived in the 90s. Like Goldfinger, GoldenEye has one of the greatest villains and henchmen in the series. Sean Bean's performance as Alec Trevelyan is amazing. He brings such a realistic performance to this character, one that makes him feel grounded and larger than life all at the same time. That's really hard to do, especially with a Bond villain. This approach makes him stand out. You can really feel how unique this villain is in the statue scene. This might be my favorite scene in a Bond movie that doesn't involve stunt work or action, just acting. It's a really well-shot, well-acted scene. The scene is the revelation that Trevelyan, Bond's former friend, was a double agent all along. His tragic backstory involving the death of his parents is revealed, and just everything works for me here. This is one of the most personal Bond villains in the series, and it adds an extra layer to all the other crazy stuff he's planning that's more typical of a Bond plot. Not to mention, he's completely wrong to hate Bond for leaving him for dead. Bond thought he was shot in the head and had no reason to think otherwise. The henchman in this one is, of course, the iconic Xenia Onatopp, a psychotic woman who gets turned on sexually by killing people. This adds such an unhinged element to her. Many of the most memorable Bond henchmen are the strong silent type, but this time they decided to give Xenia a voice and make her an attractive woman. It's hard to be hot and frightening at the same time, and Famke Janssen does an amazing job at pulling it off. And then the opening scene with the dam and the intro to Pierce is great. The title sequence looks great. There's no more silhouettes. The theme is that Bond is now in a post-Soviet world with relics, statues, and sickles everywhere. This theme is also prevalent in the film itself. There's a lot of Soviet iconography shown in ruin in this film. This was the first post-Soviet Bond film. Then there's a 9-year time jump, so the opening was a flashback, and now Bond is racing hot girls and banging his evaluator. Plus, my boy got champagne in the armrest. I like him already. M's office is finally a different set. I swear to God it was the same one for every film up till this one. This Q gadget scene is one of my favorites. It just shows guys getting fucked up by testing the weapons.
A pen. This is a Class 4 grenade. Don't say it.
The writing's on the wall?
See? Told you he had the best lines. The General from The Living Daylights returns as a different character, a good guy in this one. Some other classic scenes. The tank scene. What more can you say? The pen scene. One of the most iconic gadgets and most tense scenes in Bond history. And, come on, Boris rules. So does his death. This line.
It's what keeps me alive.
No. It's what keeps you, though.
And who on earth could forget this one?
For England, James? No. For me.
Not to mention, Trevelyan's death is the most iconic bad guy death in the franchise. Hands down. Bond letting this guy go off this structure before it crashes on top of him is so epic and classic. Can't be beat. Just as Goldfinger had made James Bond a permanent fixture over 30 years before, GoldenEye re-established Bond as a figure who could survive legal trouble, a long hibernation, and a changing film landscape. If Goldfinger was the most iconic and important Bond film, GoldenEye was surely its follow-up in both of those things. And, like Goldfinger, it wasn't just a top-tier Bond flick. It was a top-tier action flick. Martin Campbell had directed a Bond film that received universal praise from critics and fans alike, and still does. One that was important to this franchise. And the crazy thing is, he would do it a second time, but not for a while. Like a debate over which Bond movie is the greatest, which Bond movie is the most underrated is also an extremely fun argument to have. But if you ask me, it's this one. Unlike most of the films in this series, I knew virtually nothing about Tomorrow Never Dies going in. It was never near the top of Bond lists, never near the bottom. There wasn't a moment in the film that seemed to stand out to other people when ranking these movies. And I can say, with absolute confidence, that not only is Tomorrow Never Dies the most underrated James Bond film, it's one of the best. This is helped by the fact that Elliot Carver, played by Jonathan Pryce, is a top-tier Bond villain. And I mean like top 5 of all time ever. He steals the show in every scene he's in. He's energetic. And he is the single most realistic James Bond villain of them all. Carver is a media mogul, clearly inspired by William Randolph Hearst, and another character inspired by Hearst, Charles Foster Kane. He creates his own bad news, which he uses to start wars between countries, so his company can gain exclusive broadcast rights in those countries. There is not a single more achievable plan that a bad guy in a Bond movie has ever had. How do I know this? Because there are several Elliot Carvers on Earth already who do this every day. This is what the news actually is. The real world news is Elliot Carver's future news. Carver isn't the only thing that makes this movie so good, but he's an enormous part of it. Come on, that scene where he openly mocks Hao Lin's Asian kung fu moves was fucking funny as shit. And his death was a lot of fun. Speaking of Wai Lin, she's a great Bond girl. You know I love the ones who can hold their own with Bond. And she's played by Michelle Yeoh. This is the era where you start to see an increase in Bond girls who are consistently actual known actresses and not just like some hot girl they put in the movie. Even though she's a much better Bond girl than the last two interchangeable Asian Bond girls, she's definitely playing up Asian stereotypes. There's a point in this movie where she throws a fucking ninja star. There are amazing action scenes in this movie. That entire bike scene where they're handcuffed to each other and the chopper starts chasing them with the blades pointed down was incredible. This movie also has one of my absolute favorite gadgets of all time. The touchscreen self-driving car. And the scene where he uses the car was so unbelievably fucking awesome. And then it's followed by a moment so fucking insane and funny that I just gotta tell you about it. Okay, here it is. Driving that car off that roof into that storefront has got to be the most innocent people James Bond has ever endangered in a single moment in this series. Dude, what the fuck are you doing? You could have just killed a bunch of people. You didn't because this is a James Bond movie, but what the fuck? There wasn't a second thought in your head about doing this? What's wrong with you? This movie also contains a fucking hilarious scene involving Vincent Schiavelli as a hitman. Just watch this scene. It rules. Plus, if you needed proof of how good Brosnan's delivery is, look no further.
I'm just a professional doing a job. Me too. Up on your left.
Okay, it's official. Tomorrow Never Dies is the second funniest James Bond movie. What else do I like about this one? The Sheryl Crow song and title sequence are really cool. This movie has the first and only exciting scuba scene in the entire James Bond franchise. Finally! You did him to death and you finally got a hit on one. Plus the scene where they're trapped inside the sinking ship is great, and they brought Wade back. It's kind of funny that they know that Carver is behind everything already. That's not a plot point that Bond finds out over the course of the movie, like in a normal Bond flick. This was also the first Bond film made after the death of Albert Broccoli, and the film is dedicated to him. Rest in power, King. We would not have this franchise if it wasn't for you. Tomorrow Never Dies did not seem to get much critical or audience love when it came out, which is a shame. It's a fantastic Bond flick, but there is a reason for this. You see, earlier that year, a different movie came out which would change the future of James Bond. And that movie was Austin Powers' International Man of Mystery. Austin Powers, of course, became a cultural phenomenon in its own right, just as James Bond had. The difference was that this cultural phenomenon was a direct parody of James Bond. It didn't hurt that the first two Austin Powers movies were legitimately funny, especially the first one. And Mike Myers' portrayal of the titular spy became iconic. Lines like,
For England, James? No. For me.
became overshadowed by lines like,
Oh, behave. Yeah. Yeah, baby. Yeah.
Austin made fun of Bond's gadgets, he made fun of his womanizing, and Dr. Evil mocked just about every Bond villain, especially Blofeld, who his look was modeled directly after. But most of all, the plot of the first movie mocked Bond in a more discreet way. Austin Powers, this relic of the 60s, is frozen and thawed out in the 90s, and suddenly, he doesn't fit in. His old ways of doing things are totally jarring and out of place now. This, whether on purpose or not, became a metaphor for how Bond was starting to look to some moviegoers. Because no matter how good or bad a Bond flick is, it's still a Bond flick. Certain things are going to happen no matter what. Austin Powers plagued the entire rest of the Pierce Brosnan era. There were only 3 Austin Powers films, but they were all released the same year as the last 3 Pierce Brosnan films, and always first. Austin Powers would come out in the summer, James Bond would come out in the fall. 3 different years. For 3 different years, Austin Powers would do some silly spy shit, and suddenly, James Bond would do the same thing, and it would look silly by comparison. This is the duress that the final 3 Pierce Brosnan films were made under, which led to the end of the old way things were done when it came to James Bond films. The World Is Not Enough is not a bad movie, but it is a roller coaster ride of good decisions and dumb ones, which places it pretty firmly in the middle of my ranking of these movies. I do think the best thing about this one is the villain, Elektra King. Sophie Marceau's performance really stands out here. She honestly kind of steals the show. And her motivation is understandable. M used her as bait, which caused her to get kidnapped. She then used her charm to brainwash Reynard, who we are initially led to believe is the villain, but who is really the henchman, though it becomes clear from the start that Elektra is involved somehow. They don't hide that twist very well. We're more misled into thinking it's Stockholm Syndrome than that she's actually in charge of Reynard. Though Reynard's superpower of not being able to feel pain was fucking stupid. And this is the first Bond film where M is in danger, and the first where she did something morally dubious. Also, did the plot of this movie sound familiar to you? Because they used it again in Skyfall. So to all you motherfuckers who think Skyfall was so good and unique among Bond films, it recycled the plot of this one. What else do I have to say? The CG torpedoes look bad, the boat chase editing is bad, the sawcopters were kind of cool. Oh, and this was Desmond Llewellyn's final performance as Q. He even talks about retiring in the movie, which means they probably knew this would be his last time playing Q. This made me sad. This was the end of the longest era in this franchise. John Cleese is now R, Q's very brief replacement, and I mean very brief. He was in this movie and the next one. That's it. Oh, and let's not forget Denise Richards plays a woman named Christmas Jones, which is the stupidest name I have ever heard. What's even stupider? The reason they gave this character this name.
I thought Christmas only comes once a year.
You named an entire character Christmas Jones just for that joke? Alright, you guys. We finally arrived at the most universally hated James Bond movie. It's not my least favorite Bond movie. There are at least 5 I can think of off the top of my head that I hated more than this one. But something about this one made a lot of fucking people very fucking angry. And here's why. Die Another Day is an anti-Bond film. To the point where I think it may have been on purpose. It feels like more of an anti-Bond film than Austin Powers. This film does everything wrong. It lacks any respect for what came before it, disses all of the stunt work and practical effects that made this series what it is, and breaks every rule that the series has ever laid out. And yet, one thing I can say about this movie is that it's not boring. This movie is entertaining. It does so much wrong that I couldn't look away. One thing that everyone agrees on is that this is the one that used way too much CGI, and it looks like absolute shit. There are parts of this movie that look like a fucking cartoon. It's ridiculous right from the opening gunshot. They actually show a bullet coming towards the viewer, and it looks so bad. Not to mention the weird percussion choices in the music. Then, of course, there's the entire windsurfing scene. We all love that one. I think this is the 3rd worst edited Bond movie, but is definitely the worst overall looking Bond movie. This movie just looks ugly and tacky. It looks like shit. There are these weird slow-mo sped up scenes. I don't know why anyone thought these would be a good idea. And the plot of this movie. On paper, it might have the funniest plot of them all. For starters, you expect me to believe that James Bond was a North Korean prisoner for 14 months and never escaped. This general wants his son to be a bridge between North Korea and the West. What is this guy? The most progressive North Korean who ever lived? Why don't you start by fucking feeding your people? And this same general wants to destroy the Icarus thing that his son wanted to use, and it's so fucking funny to think that a North Korean general wouldn't be down with a super weapon. He would hop on that shit immediately. And of course, there's the plot twist where the son of the general is revealed to be this white Englishman the whole time because he used surgery to disguise himself. So this is the inverse of Sean Connery turning Asian. But then, how did his whole ass accent change? The surgery wouldn't have changed his voice. This movie has, bar none, the worst Bond song and title sequence in the entire series. It does not sound or look a fucking thing like it should. It's so tacky. Oh, and if it wasn't enough listening to Madonna fuck up the theme song, she's in the movie too! They put the musician in the movie. I'm telling you, it's an anti-Bond film. Another weird song choice, they use London Calling in a scene in the film, and that is such a fucking weird choice of song to put in a James Bond movie. I think Jinx is a terrible Bond girl, even though she's another agent, which usually makes for a good Bond girl. But she's not. Also, I'm pretty sure this movie has the only actual on-screen sex scene in the series. There's always sex surrounding James Bond, but it's implied. Heavily implied, but implied. You'll see the lead up to sex or the aftermath, but never the sex. They broke that rule too. But then again, how could you hate a movie that contains this line?
I am Zhao. You are late.
And I love at the end that all the North Korean guys get sucked out of the plane, but Bond and Graves can just have a fist fight without getting sucked out. I love that the fencing match turns into an impromptu actual sword fight with the bad guy throwing his sword at Bond's head with witnesses all over the fucking place. The gadgets in this movie are incredibly stupid. The virtual reality glasses, the invisible car, these are absurd. Yes, I think the remote-controlled car is cool and the invisible car is stupid. Fight me. There is an ice palace that contains an ice bedroom, because lying down on a giant slab of ice would be totally comfortable, I guess. There's a scene where Bond says he's sorry and he's like whispering. Die Another Day is so bad it's kinda good, but not as good as it could be. There are some truly funny moments in this movie, all of them by accident, but I just could not get over how fugly this fucking movie is. It's just a fugly-ass movie. Like, look at this. This looks like Mr. Freeze is gonna come skating out. The sheer hideousness of the settings, editing, effects, and music of this film make this one less enjoyable than I've made it out to be. Oh, but Michael Madsen is in it. Rest in peace, King. This may surprise you, but when Die Another Day came out, a decent number of film critics seemed to like it. And I have no idea what movie they were watching, but it sure as hell wasn't this one. According to Wikipedia, Entertainment Weekly magazine also gave a positive reaction, saying that Tamahori, a true filmmaker, has reestablished the series' pop sensuality. A.O. Scott of the New York Times called the film the best of the James Bond series since The Spy Who Loved Me. You cannot convince me that these people watched this movie. But audiences did, and they fucking hated it. This, more than any other movie in the series, was the closest this series felt to jumping the shark. It jumped the ice. This movie changed people. There were lifelong fans of James Bond who saw this movie and vowed to never watch another James Bond movie. And at this point, some of them had put up with the ups and downs of James Bond for 40 years, and this was the final straw. This was an insult so great that there didn't seem to be any coming back from it. The credits still say 007 will return, but if he did, things would have to change. Oh, and just a quick aside, they actually plan to make a movie about Jinx. Yes, of all the Bond girls ever, Jinx from Die Another Day came closest to getting her own movie. Thankfully, this was canceled. Halle Berry was quoted saying this was because nobody was ready to sink that kind of money into a black female action star. Yeah, Halle, that's why it didn't get made. It wasn't because Die Another Day sucked dick. But Halle Berry got the last laugh when she got to play that black female action star in 2004's Catwoman. We all know how good that movie was. You sure showed him, Halle. And so, Pierce Brosnan's time as Bond was over. I don't think any other Bond had such a dramatic rise and fall. His tenure as Bond exploded with one of the most beloved films in the franchise, and ended with what seemed like a mercy kill. He was like a horse who ran fresh out of the gate, winning every race, then got injured once, and blam! And the guy holding the gun? Austin Powers. Yep. Yeah. But people wouldn't forget what Brosnan had brought to the role of James Bond. Brosnan had taken the best of the Bonds who came before him and blended them all together, in the process creating his own Bond. A Bond who could be whatever the films needed him to be. No other Bond had the killer line delivery he had. He took quips and witticisms to heights that no other Bond reached. Suave, witty, humorous, dark, and sleek. Pierce Brosnan's Bond was the most well-shaken James Bond martini we ever got. But it wasn't enough to save him. His Bond could fit just about any mold, but couldn't stand up to an audience that had finally been shown an honest mockery of what they had been watching. or his own movies that began openly proving those mockeries right. It's a shame. Brosnan wanted to be in more Bond films. Like Roger Moore, he loved the role. But Die Another Day had opened something up in Eon, a desperate notion that they could never, ever allow something like this to happen ever again. They needed to make the most drastic change James Bond had ever seen. And so, Pierce Brosnan became the first and only Bond actor to be let go from the role. He was the first Bond to be fired. They say the times make the man, and that is true of every James Bond. But I think that in Pierce Brosnan's case specifically, the times screwed the man. But James Bond, he would survive. He'd rise like a phoenix from the ashes. But he'd be different. And I don't just mean a different actor. I mean he, James Bond himself, would be different. As it would turn out, for 007, this would be no time to die. Guys, thanks so much for watching another installment of a James Bond journey. How did you feel about Brosnan's time as Bond? Leave a comment, and like and subscribe. And for those of you wondering about that Nicktoon I'm going to review, here's your hint.